is a piece by Jason Napoli Brooks, who's here. And Parker and I saw him do a reading the other day. There he is right there. And we were so impressed that I said, hey, Jason, write a monologue for Parker Posey, the one woman that made him question his sexuality. And mine.
I just need to give them space about that.
All right, let's get your cell phone lights up for Parker Posey. Women at the End of the World, Act 1, abridged. A bar with a narrow wooden top. Single bulb lights hang from stem fixtures. A woman walks through the audience. Under ideal circumstances, the audience would be dead or the living dead. She climbs up and stands on top of the bar between two of the stem fixtures. She is disoriented, but composes herself.
The end of the world involves a lot of walking. There are no roads or bridges from where you are to anywhere you have been or have not. No pavement to walk on. No streets to drive down. There's only a suggestion of streets that might have been. A species of tree you've never seen before now grows from every inch of the earth. No one is alive to walk through these suggestions of streets among these trees. There are only packs of raccoons that should be avoided at all costs. I have seen all of this with my very own eyes. My last resort. I found one path through these trees, a path that I have followed through the dark of tonight, which is all day, to this place where I now stand in front of you, this tabletop of a belly of a sinking ship, this stool on a floor of a 1,000-mile crater. This stopover in the land of the dead and the undead, my new and last home. You know, I wasn't always a wreck. Before the end of the world, I had a lover, a Russian who was a runway model, but mostly was a cocktail waiter. Though later he became much more for me, and eventually he would become not much at all. Before the end of the world, he lived with me in a downtown apartment that I owned. And when the world ended, there was a flood, or a bomb, or a collision of earth and ground, or a plague of some flavor. My lover told me to go back to bed and not to bat an eyelash. He'd take care of everything. He was attentive like that. Go back to sleep, beautiful. He rolled over and whispered in my ear, the future of the world is not your future. Then he slid under the sheets, slipped jeans over his bare backside. My lover had a disdain for underwear. Smoked a cigarette and ashed it on the floor. Then he walked out the front door, telling me to stay put while he would go and see what was left of the world. I had no idea what state he'd be in when I next saw him. I suppose he didn't either, otherwise he would have stayed in bed with me. The first time I met him, my lover called me a real fixer-upper. For a cocktail waiter, he was a remarkable judge of character. Now let's get to work on you, he told me on our first date. Or else you'll end up with a one-way ticket out of the big city and back to that Midwest town in the rectum of God knows where. Timo suffers of corn cutlets and Ritz cracker salad. See, I was a talented kid, and the phone was always ringing. But my lover and his care for me made my life all the better. He'd deploy himself as a one-man whispering campaign, dropping my name at fancy cocktail parties, slip my headshot under cocktail napkins, allow the big city's top talent agents to take him in their mouths while he recited verbatim from memory the contents of my resume. Then when the work came, and boy, did it ever, it was my lover who answered my calls, ran everything by me, shored up my contracts, picked up my checks, paid my bills with the money I made, of course. This lover talked to everybody for me. He told them whatever was on my mind. Sometimes I wouldn't even tell him what was on my mind, but no matter, he always knew. She wants these shirts boxed, not pressed, I'd hear him say to someone or other. She wants a bigger roll with a lot more swearing and a lot less smiling. She wants a phone call from her mother, not her father. She wants an interview with a men's magazine, not a woman's magazine. She wants to adopt, but not just yet. She wants to lounge in bed all day. She doesn't want to have dinner with you, but okay, fine, she'll have dinner with you. She wants you to know that she's doing you a huge favor. I had it good with my lover. And after he left me the day the world ended, I did exactly as he instructed and stayed in bed. Who was I to argue with him? Outside the window of the bedroom, I watched the buildings go gray and crumble. Visions, vines of red ivy blanketed the windows and everything. The power went out and the ceiling above my bed swelled with a brown stain with veins of green mold. One morning as I awoke from an unusually sound night of sleep, the water stain spoke to me. It said, and just what are you looking at? I felt embarrassed for the water stain, as if I had caught it in an intimate moment of vulnerability. So I averted my eyes to the floor beside my bed, where sat the ashes of my lover's last cigarette. I scooped up the ashes with my fingertips, and traced them over my lips. Was that good for you? It was just then, or maybe it was the next day, or maybe it was the next week. There was a knock at the door. "Go away!" I shouted. "Don't you know I'm busy?" The door creaked open and a Mexican man in a baseball hat poked his head in. "Are you crazy, lady?" he said. "You can't lie in your bed all day. It's the end of the world. At least come down and have a drink with the rest of us." "He's got a point," said the water stain. "Might as well have a few laughs before we all bite the dust." "There's just no privacy these days," I shouted. Then I sprang up from my bed. I asked the Mexican to toss me my clothes from where they sat crumbled on the floor. "I'm going for a walk," I said. "I'll not be with the likes of you and be without my lover." The Mexican told me that I had lost the plot. That the streets were gone and now ruled by raccoons. I paid no mind to him and stomped out the door with nothing more than these clothes on my back. The world, I found, was much different from what I had known before. The ground unraveled endlessly. The sky appeared as patches of earth through which dripped the green waters of the ocean. All buildings and structures lay in ruin. When I turned around to have one last look at my apartment building, it too had collapsed in a heap of rubble. I was alone on what could have been taken for a path through the silver leaf trees that now grew everywhere. I walked along this path what could have been days or weeks, or during a time where there was no time. It was on this path that I found the remains of my lover. His limbs were torn from his body and had been tossed beside him with seeming abandon. His body was still clothed, and I couldn't help but think of how under those jeans he was naked, without underwear. What a mess was made of that beautiful body. What a mess was made by the claws of the animals, by the hands of man, perhaps by the hands of a woman. Now his mouth was frozen as the horizon, and I bent over and kissed his lips. As my lips left his were still the sweetest lips that the world has ever had to offer. I noticed all around me the shadowy forms of 1,000 raccoons who circled me in silence. But I did not fear. For some reason I knew I would never be harmed anywhere I went. Instead, I was herded back onto the path through the trees, escorting me to this place here, the only place left, the end of the world, where I now stand for all of you who are now dead. For my last performance. I close my eyes and I see him rotting in a world gone over the edge. Now I open my eyes and see a world reborn relieved of its heroes.
Parker Posey and Jason Napoli Brooks. So you might want to party like it's the end of the world.
She nailed it. She nailed it. It's exactly how I imagined it. It's incredible. Now I have to go smoke. I thought it would be better to put it in a larger context, so I envisioned this idea of this larger play called The Women at the End of the World, and the first monologue would be delivered by Parker, and so I wrote it very quickly. It happened within less than 48 hours that I wrote this. She read it in the way that I imagined it, but then in ways that I had never imagined it, which is exactly what you want from an actor reading a work of theater when you're a playwright. Or a screenwriter. I mean, I could see that she spent time with it. She really was this woman at the end of the world. She added the urgency, the sense of confusion, and then a sense of resilience at the same time. And because it's Parker, she adds this really natural sense of comedy to the piece. And I think the comedy really came out in it, for me anyway. And so it was pretty fantastic to see happen, especially in a space like that, so small, and so many people crowded around there. I know it was probably, there was probably a little bit of pressure on her too, because this is in some ways out of her element too. I mean, to perform in this kind of setting, so many people right in her face. But yeah, she just completely nailed it. And I wrote the piece with her in mind, her voice in mind, her presence in mind, and that's exactly what happened.